The Samsung HW-Q800T is what I would deem as a mid-range soundbar. At least in Samsung's portfolio, that's exactly where it sits. It comes in at around £600 in the UK and $600 in the US. If you're interested in purchasing it, the locally link in the description below will take you to your localized Amazon store. Also down there, you'll find some alternatives that you might want to consider. Now, before proceeding with this detailed review, if you do have Instagram or Twitter, I'd very much appreciate a follow. And if you're interested in keeping up with the latest news or reviews about electric or hybrid vehicles, do check out Totally EV, where I'm effectively doing a new car review on the platform every single week. Now, to kick things off, let's talk about the build quality and design, and here I feel Samsung have done a decent job, whereby the soundbar has a metal enclosure, at least from the front and the top. It's got a metal grille effectively. On the sides, however, it's got a plastic insert, and yes, that's a nod to say that it doesn't have sideward firing speakers, and we'll touch upon this later down in the review. Furthermore, it's got a relatively small footprint, so therefore it can fit under, let's say, most size TVs, and in my case, on my IKEA cabinet in comparison to my 55-inch TV, I feel that it doesn't take too much space and doesn't dominate in terms of the presence of the room. So over here, in terms of design standpoint, it's pretty good. However, in terms of functionality, I don't really like the fact that Samsung have opted for touch-sensitive buttons found at the top of the soundbar. This is a regression, in my opinion, in comparison to Samsung's older line of soundbars, whereby you had a physical button instead. This means that accidental presses are less occurrent in the older models, whereas in the HW-Q800T means that, let's say, if you have pets, then it might occur some random touch inputs, which I'm not exactly a fan of. Now, elsewhere, it's nice to see that Samsung has retained an LCD display on the right-hand side of the soundbar, whereby when you're adjusting the volume, for example, or going through the settings, you can have a visual indicator on the soundbar itself. And furthermore, if you're not going to be using it, it does dim off the time, therefore it doesn't take away from the overall viewing experience that you have, and therefore doesn't mean that it's going to be distracting. Now, in terms of inputs and outputs, you've got a singular HDMI in and output, and here the eARC standard is also supported, so if your TV can support it and you're going to be utilizing that, it might be better for your Dolby Atmos viewing experience. And yes, the soundbar supports both Dolby Atmos and DTS:X. Elsewhere, you do have optical input as well, and in terms of wireless connectivity, you've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, although the latter only supports the SBC codec only, so therefore I'd only resort to this if you're going to be using it without really caring too much about the overall sound quality. Now, moving on, we've got the remote, which really hasn't changed in terms of design over the previous models, but why should it? Because it's very slender and nice to look at. Furthermore, it's very functional, where you've got input change at the top left, you've also got the Bluetooth pairing that you can do, you've got the media controls, and then you've got the mute and then sound modes and the cog icon, which basically means that you can cycle through the different settings. Then you've got a dedicated volume rocker, and also if you were to tap on it, it will mute it. And then the same goes for the woofer, where you can adjust the woofer volume independently from the bass EQ. Now, that's not all, because you've also got the Samsung SmartThings app, which you can see over here that I've set up on my account. And in this respect, you've got a variety of different settings that you can adjust from the volume itself, or indeed adjusting the sound modes directly through the app, or for example looking at the equalizer as well. So it means that you've got a variety of different controls that you can visually see, and ones that you don't have to rely on using the remote control, including if you just don't want to use a remote control altogether. Now, you can also go into the different inputs, so it's nice to see that you can change the HDMI, let's say for example go for HDMI, or let's say via Bluetooth, and also you can go via the Alexa setting. So this does also support Amazon Alexa, and it's got it built in, and the Alexa setting picks up pretty well. And you've also got Spotify as well. That's not quite built in, but it just has the integration of Spotify. Via the device settings, you can go via the network status and also see the Bluetooth pairing, and also adjust the audio sync as well if you have any issues when it comes to lip sync delay. And so now we get on to a sound demo, and what I'm going to do over here is play one of my friend's songs. It's from Priya J. Her song name is called Falling. In case you're interested in it, by the way, do check it down in the description below. Now, I know having any sort of sound demo over YouTube via microphones from someone like myself isn't ideal, and really you should be experiencing it for yourself in person. But of course, that's the reason you've come to this YouTube video. And as a result, I'm going to give you my subjective opinion for someone who's reviewed over excess of 400 different audio related devices, let alone a few of Samsung's soundbars themselves. Now, we're going to break it down in terms of the overall sound frequencies. I'm going to talk with the sub-bass frequencies first. And here, it's very much complemented the fact that Samsung have included a dedicated subwoofer. And that subwoofer has increased in size in comparison to yesteryear's models. And in this respect, you do get a quite hefty sound. I did see some reviews and some people saying that they didn't have enough sub-bass or bass impact, and I'm really struggling to see how they could deal with that, because in my case I actually reduced the woofer volume by -3 to -4, and even the bass EQ setting by -2, because I felt that the bass was actually a little bit overwhelming and took away from the overall sound experience. What I'm trying to say over here is that the sub-bass response will give you what you expect, specifically at this price point. And of course, it's not going to compare for those audiophiles that have dedicated bookshelf speakers and a dedicated subwoofer with a preamp or amplifier. But for a solution that people can actually set up very easily, the wireless subwoofer, in other words, the wireless from the subwoofer to the soundbar itself, delivers those low-end responses, which means it's going to keep you engaged when you're listening to music or indeed watching movies. Now, very much following on from this, the mid-bass response is actually pretty tight and controlled, which is a little bit surprising because I was expecting it to be a little bit uncontrolled given the sheer amount of bass in your face that you got. However, it's nice to see that Samsung have paid attention in this frequency range, and therefore the mid-bass impact that you get is again heartfelt and very much appreciated, again when watching movies or, let's say, listening back to music. Now, on a more negative side, however, the mid-range is a little bit pushed back. Now, while I do appreciate the fact that you can EQ this, and depending on different sound modes it will affect the overall mid-range response, but what I found is that generally speaking the mids just sound a little bit recessed, specifically into the lower mid-range. As a result, if you're watching, let's say, news or podcasts, for example, then you might want to up the notch in terms of the center and the front speaker EQ settings that you can find via the remote control. I left it to 0 because when it came to EQing that a little bit more than it should do, it gave a little bit of an artificial sound. So for example, listening to Priya's track, what I found is the sound didn't just come across how Priya intends it to be, or at least how more expensive systems would perform in this domain. And it's no surprise here because, well, this is a mid-range soundbar, so if you want that class-leading sound, then you're going to have to spend more money or go for a less convenient solution than this Samsung soundbar offers. Now, as for the highs, I had no issues whatsoever. While they do tail off at the very top end, I feel that Samsung has looked to address this by including dedicated tweeters at the front of the soundbar, which is an improvement over its previous gen model. In this respect, you will get better zingy highs and therefore keeps you a little bit more engaged when it comes to, let's say, listening up to music. And now we get on to the overall Soundstage reproduction. Now, to give you an indication as to, again, how it performs, and I know it's not going to be ideal, I'm going to play some transformers for you, and this is going to be being played at Dolby Atmos via the Dolby Atmos codec, and then going to the PCM input, so you can check for the annotations yourself as to when it's switching over.
Perimeter Optimus moving away.
Now, as you might have been able to hear, I'm not really sure if my microphone really picked it up accurately, but the Dolby Atmos effect really does come into fruition. And it's no surprise here because the soundbar supports both the Dolby Atmos and DTSX codecs, or metadata should I say, and in this respect you're just getting a more fulfilling sound. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that in comparison to soundbars, specifically from Samsung themselves or alternatives out there that have sideward firing speakers as well, this soundbar just can't compete, even with the increase of and the bettered experience with Dolby Atmos. And the reason behind that is because you just don't get that fulfilling sound. Of course, you will get a more surround sound experience in comparison to not having Dolby Atmos altogether in supported films or shows that you're watching, for example, on Netflix. But again, it's just worth bearing in mind that if you're going to be spending more money, you're going to be getting those sideward firing speakers, and it's going to give you a little bit more fulfilling sound, at least in your room. Now, Dolby Atmos and DTSX aside, specifically for those people who don't really care about it or can't utilize those metadatas for their own, let's say, content they're watching. Let's say you're watching terrestrial TV or HD terrestrial TV or even YouTube videos like this one, then you're not going to really benefit from those better metadatas that you're getting via Dolby Atmos and DTSX. Now, to give you an indication as to how the different surround modes are being affected, we're going to go back to Priya's song, and I'm going to be cycling through the different modes, and you're going to be able to hear for yourselves the differences between each of the modes.
Young should hide, then learn how to fly. It's the only way I know how to play this game to success. I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always sing, and now
Now, yet again, I know it's not going to be ideal, but hopefully you were able to pick up that the fact that standard mode seems to be a little bit more subdued and gives you more of like a stereo experience. However, for me, I found that the adaptive mode was the best mode out of the bunch. And here it gave more of a lifelike reproduction and one that was a little bit more fulfilling even for content that is recorded in a stereo format. In other words, kind of upmixing it to this 3.1.2 channel that Samsung have designed with the Samsung Soundbar. So what I'm trying to say over here is that even if you're not watching content that has that increased height information, for example, via Dolby Atmos, then what you'll find is that if you're using the adaptive sound mode, you'll be still treated with a better room-filling experience. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say over here when it comes to its Soundstage reproduction is that it's good, specifically the fact that it can support Dolby Atmos and DTSX, but even without those, it will give you a better room-filling experience over some of its competitors. However, the lack of sideward firing speakers does really play into effect over here, and therefore means that if you want to get that better cinematic experience or even music listening experience, you're going to have to spend more money or go for a separate solution which potentially integrates, let's say, rear speakers. And yes, you can purchase rear speakers separately with the Samsung HW-Q800T in order to get a little bit more of a room filling experience. But at which point you might even want to just forget the rear speakers and just go for the more upgraded variant over the HW-Q800T, and let's say go for the HW-Q90T, I think it is, or Q900T. Anyway, one of those ones which basically have the sideward firing speakers and therefore will give you a better all-in-one experience in comparison to the HW-Q800T. Now, on the whole, what I feel is that the HW-Q800T is a very good mid-range soundbar, so much so that I'm actually going to give it my Best Buy award, because at this price point it's quite hard to think of a more well-rounded soundbar that can offer a good sound quality and also good support for different metadatas, and furthermore has a nice sleek design which is just quite nice for most sort of cabinet or let's say wall mounting setups. Now, granted, it does have its flaws, and in this respect, the only way to get around its flaws, at least from my experience and from my knowledge, would simply be to be purchasing more expensive soundbars. Now, if you don't care about Dolby Atmos or DTSX, you might also want to consider the JBL Bar 5.1 that I previously reviewed, because that has a really thumping sound. And while it won't give you that same sort of surround sound experience, the overall tonality and sound signature that that has is also very pleasant to someone's ears, like myself, and is also cheaper than this Samsung soundbar. So of course, your mileage may vary depending on what your needs are. So I'd be very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you've got any questions, again, ask me down below and I'll try my best to answer them. And furthermore, if you like this video, give it a like. And of course, it goes without saying, if you want to see more from the channel, subscribe and hit that bell notification to get notified via your YouTube inbox when a new video goes live. Alright, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.